This is actually for a customer. This is Noah Sunderman in Chicago, Illinois. We have a little orange Clubman GT that we're preparing, and these are the parts going on his car. And you know, these are the top 10 things that we seem to be putting on just about every Mini that has a lot of miles rolling in here. The first thing is the engineering things that Ward was talking about. One of the biggest problems with a Mini that was built after 1976 was they went to a rubber isolated subframe. Well, that rubber isolated subframe caused a really the first time I ever drove a rubber subframe car, I remember, because I had always driven Mark 1s and they are solid mounted subframe. And I took a 76 or 77 Mini, and as I was driving it, I just was like, it felt all squishy and squirrely and weird, and I was like, I pulled over to the side of the road because I thought something was really wrong with the car. I'm like, I felt like the suspension was falling out of it. It was literally the subframe inside the car was shifting around because of the rubber grommets that they use to hold the subframe in. So what we've done is we go to the solid subframe mount kits now. On all 76 and on, up to 2000 Mini, they have a single subframe tower bolt, all right? And these were isolated by rubber. So get rid of those rubber bushings and put in a solid mount, and that gives you this nimbleness and the handling of the early Mark 1s, which was a really good way to do it. The reason they went to the rubber is that the biggest complaint they found from customers of the Mini after 1976 was, well, it's kind of noisy and loud, and you know, could you make it softer and quieter? Well, they thought, well, we'll rubber isolate the subframe. Well, that was a big mistake. It just ruined the handling, really, is what it did. And they wear out, you know. I mean, rubber just fatigues, and pretty soon that, like an old motor mount, that whole subframe and suspension and engine assembly is just floating in the chassis of the car. It's not doing anything.
The bad part about the rubber ones, especially the back ones.
Yeah, these ones right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bad part about that is, like, I had normally the old cars, if you whack the curb with your wheel or whatever, it would just bend the lower arm. Now what it does is it just moves the whole subframe over and it breaks those mounts. So then the whole car, even the body, gets tilted out of shape because it's still hooked in the front.
Yep.
So those rubber mounts are pretty scary.
Yeah, they are. And so what Ward's talking about is we replaced the rear of the front subframe mount with a solid mount. There's no rubber here. And it really looks like a motor mount. And almost every single one that we pull out of the car really isn't even connected. From oil and age and damage, they fall in half. They weren't really holding the subframe in the car at all. So this is really
a railroad track and leave your motor bar.
Yeah, true.
Subframe at all?
Yeah.
The way I met Jeremy was I went to Ken's house, and whenever you let off the gas while it was in gear, it would go bump, 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 bump. And I went to Baxter's, and Baxter said, see that guy? And that's what Jeremy found in my car, was that the engine was rotating, and the alternator was hitting on the frame of the car.
It was moving so badly that the alternator was literally hitting the slam panel. So yeah, Bruce's motor was barely hanging in there. But yeah.
850s were notorious in the early days for rocking back and forth and dropping the tailpipe. It just seemed like you had to have, I mean, it just seems like you had to have spare tailpipe at home because you break the flange off because they rotated back and forth so much. Or
Not that anyone has an 850 these days.
Well, no, it's not the 850. It's the Magic Wand. Okay, so like Eric's car right here has a Magic Wand, but we have stabilizers to help keep that engine from moving, because like Ward's saying, the 850 or the Magic Wand style has no stabilizers. I mean, you got one dog bone in the front, and that was the only thing holding it from rocking.
The first thing that happened was like the right motor mount always broke.
Yeah, yeah. So a Magic Wand transmission car, typically 850, always broke motor mounts, and the engine stabilizers are always shot. So, you know, it's really important to stabilize the engine with or the subframe with solid mounts, and of course your engine stabilizers. the other thing is that these suspension cones, I used to say that 9 out of 10 minis that rolled in the shop, you know, we would have to do this. I'm starting to say 10 out of 10. I mean, really, every single car that hasn't had their cones replaced
That's the trouble with those things.
is they're
They
wore out.
continually distort until they turn themselves inside out, basically.
Well, here's an old one. I'll hold them up for you. As you can see,
I think that one you have in your right hand there is maybe even a little more excessive than the average.
it is because Dr. Alex Moulton created this. Now, just before he died, which is about 2 years ago, he redesigned and recreated his original Moulton cone. This is what most of them look like, and this came out of a '97 Mini. Okay, so
Rubber didn't get any better.
I know it was horrible. So what Dr. Alex Moulton did was he redesigned the chemical makeup of the rubber itself. He redesigned the shape of the cone, the internal shape, and he made front and he made rear specific cones. The front is designed to handle the 333 pounds in the front, and the rear has very little weight back there. So these are progressive and they're different. All right. So we found that these Dr. Alex Moulton, and they say Moulton right on them. Okay.
They always did.
These are awesome.
Yeah.
I have just fallen in love with these. Bill Beeler
The only
gave us a
thing-
story.
the only
Where are
thing-
you, Bill?
Yeah.
When we put these in Bill's car the first time, he came back and said that my Mini drives smoother than my BMW. It was more compliant. Still go-kart handling,
Well,
but
you
he
had-
could
you
go
actually
he
had
could go
some
over a bump.
suspension. You even actually had some suspension.
Yeah, he
That's
was.
the trouble with
You
the
know,
other
like I
one.
said, when the Minis come rolling in, immediately I can see they're sitting on their bump stops. All right, it's because of these old wore-out cones. I mean, they're just rubber. Again, doesn't like two things: age and heat. So
Over in Japan, instead of replacing the springs, they just put a thumb guard on them.
so they can drag and keep them going. When you do the cones, you have to use a set of high-lows. Okay.
No, you don't
Because-
have to, do you?
Well, yeah, you do. On these, they're so. I mean, that
Too
cone is so
long?
too tall. It's designed to compress. I mean, it's really
Do they
doing
have
its
a
job.
thread in there that you compress them?
Yes, there
So
is.
you got
They are
string
threaded, so
compressor?
you can put them in. But if you were to use the stock trumpet, the Mini would look like a 4x4. I mean, it would be this high off the ground. Okay. Huh? Okay, so you do need a set of high-lows because you got to drop it to a proper ride height. And what the other thing we noticed is these do break in. It takes about 150 to 200 miles, and they settle over an inch. Okay, so they do work themselves into the point where Brian, how many times have we adjusted your suspension now? Several. We want to get the ride height right,
Yeah,
so
the
just
other
plan
thing-
on it.
Other thing you gotta know is in 20 years, those ones you just got through putting in look like the old ones. And
True.
You start all over.
They're not a lifetime cone. This is not. They're rubber. All right. Now these Dunlop ones that were made in the '90s, I actually found out were manufactured in India. These were the worst. I mean, these went flat almost immediately. All right. These,
Yeah, but you gotta lower the car
thankfully,
out of it.
we're guessing these are probably going to last 10 to 15 years, maybe 20. That's pushing it. But plan on replacing them again. You know, I mean, they're designed. They're wearable items.
Like a regular shock.
Yeah, you know, but they do last a whole heck of a lot longer than these. We stopped using these. We used to think that these were the greatest things since sliced bread in the 90s.
They still are.
Well, some people think so, but I've seen this happen more times than not. There's two inherent problems with the coil springs. One, when you jack the car up, they fall out. All right? Two, they fatigue to the point where they snap, they break. And I've replaced probably, I'd say, 12 springs, you know, broken. And I didn't do anything wrong.
Haven't I put a whole bunch of those in and I